My name is Sarah, and what I'm about to tell you might sound like something out of a soap opera, but every word is true. Sometimes the people who should protect you the most are the ones who wound you deepest. Sometimes standing up for yourself means losing everything you thought mattered. And sometimes, just sometimes, that loss becomes the greatest gift you never knew you needed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm 32 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had built the perfect life in Phoenix, Arizona. The desert heat never bothered me the way it did other transplants from cooler climates. I actually loved those brilliant Arizona sunsets that painted the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink every evening. My ranch-style house in Scottsdale had a sparkling pool in the backyard, where I'd float on lazy Sunday afternoons, and large windows that let the morning light stream across the hardwood floors I'd spent months picking out. I work as a marketing coordinator for a boutique firm downtown, the kind of job that challenges me just enough to keep things interesting without consuming my entire life. My days are filled with creative campaigns, client meetings, and the occasional crisis that makes me feel genuinely useful. I drive 25 minutes to work each morning through neighborhoods lined with palm trees and cacti, listening to podcasts about everything from true crime to personal development. It's a routine that had become comfortable, predictable, safe. Michael and I met 7 years ago at a friend's housewarming party in Tempe. He was the quiet guy in the corner nursing a beer, watching everyone else play beer pong and being loud. Something about his calm presence drew me in. He had this way of listening, really listening when you talked to him. No checking his phone, no looking over your shoulder for someone more interesting. Just complete attention, like you were the only person in the room worth hearing. He's an accountant, which I know sounds boring to some people, but there's something deeply reassuring about being with someone who approaches life methodically. Michael thinks through decisions carefully, weighs pros and cons, never jumps into anything without considering the consequences. After growing up with parents who made impulsive choices that often left our family scrambling, his stability felt like exactly what I needed. We dated for 3 years before he proposed, and even then, it wasn't some grand romantic gesture. We were hiking Camelback Mountain on a Saturday morning, both of us sweaty and tired from the climb, when he stopped at a scenic overlook and pulled out a simple solitaire ring. "I can't imagine doing this life thing with anyone else," he said, gesturing toward the sprawling city below us. "Will you marry me?" It wasn't the proposal little girls dream about, but it felt real, honest, like everything else about Michael. Our wedding was small, held at a vineyard in Sedona with just close family and friends. I remember feeling so grateful that day, looking around at all the people who had supported us, thinking about how lucky I was to marry into such a tight-knit family. Michael's parents, Patricia and Robert, had welcomed me from the beginning with the kind of warmth I'd always craved. His mother would call just to check in. His father would text me articles he thought I'd find interesting about marketing trends. They made me feel like the daughter they'd always wanted. Then there was David, Michael's older brother, and his wife Jennifer. David had always been the charmer of the family, the one with the easy laugh and quick wit who could work a room like he was running for office. He sold real estate, and he was good at it. The kind of guy who could convince you that the house you were looking at was exactly what you'd been searching for your whole life, even if you hadn't known you were searching for anything at all. Jennifer taught 3rd grade and had this lovely, nurturing energy that made everyone feel comfortable. She was the one who remembered birthdays, organized family gatherings, and always brought the perfect hostess gift. Together, they seemed like the golden couple of the family. David's success in real estate had afforded them a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, complete with a 3-car garage and a backyard that looked like it belonged in a home and garden magazine. For 4 years, this felt like my tribe. Sunday dinners at Patricia and Robert's house became a cherished tradition. We'd gather around their dining room table, sharing stories about our weeks, planning family vacations, celebrating each other's successes. When I got promoted to senior marketing coordinator, Patricia insisted on making my favorite chocolate cake to celebrate. When Michael closed a particularly challenging audit for a difficult client, the whole family treated us to dinner at his favorite steakhouse. I loved how they included me in everything, how they never made me feel like an outsider looking in. Growing up, my own family had been fractured by divorce and distance. My parents lived in separate states now, both remarried to people I barely knew. Holiday gatherings were awkward affairs split between different homes, different traditions, different expectations. But with Michael's family, I finally understood what people meant when they talked about belonging somewhere. The Christmas traditions were my favorite part. Every year, Patricia would host an elaborate Christmas Eve party. The whole house would be decorated like something out of a magazine, with garland draped along every banister, twinkling lights in every window, and a massive tree in the living room that took up half the space. Patricia would spend weeks preparing, making her famous tamales from scratch, baking dozens of cookies, and setting up a hot chocolate bar that would make Starbucks jealous. The party wasn't just for family. Patricia and Robert had built friendships over decades in their neighborhood, at their church, through Robert's work at the engineering firm where he'd spent his entire career. Their Christmas Eve gathering had become the social event of the season for their circle, with people looking forward to it all year long. I loved being part of something so established, so full of history and tradition. David always played the perfect host at these gatherings, moving through the crowd with a drink in his hand, making sure everyone felt included, telling stories that had people laughing until their sides hurt. He had this gift for remembering details about people's lives, asking about their kids' soccer games or their recent vacation or their mother's surgery. People gravitated toward him naturally, and I could see why he was so successful in sales. Michael, on the other hand, was more comfortable in smaller groups, having deeper conversations with one or two people rather than working the entire room. He'd usually end up in the kitchen with his dad, talking about sports or work, while I floated between different conversations, enjoying the warmth and energy of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about each other. Jennifer and I had developed our own friendship over the years. She was the sister I'd never had, someone I could call when I needed advice about navigating family dynamics or just wanted to vent about a frustrating day at work. We'd go shopping together, try new restaurants, take fitness classes that left us both sore and laughing. She was the one who helped me pick out the perfect dress for Michael's company Christmas party, and I was the one who held her hand in the hospital waiting room when her father had his heart attack 2 years ago. Looking back now, I realize how much I had invested in this vision of my life. I wasn't just married to Michael, I was married to his entire family, to their traditions, to the sense of stability and belonging they represented. I had shaped my identity around being part of something bigger than myself, something that felt permanent and unshakable. My own career was going well, but I'd made choices that prioritized our family life. I'd turned down a promotion that would have required more travel because I didn't want to miss our Sunday dinners. I'd chosen to stay at a smaller firm instead of pursuing opportunities at larger companies in other cities, because Phoenix was home now. Because this life we'd built together mattered more than any individual ambition. I threw myself into making our house a home, spending weekends at antique shops and farmers markets, carefully curating spaces that reflected both of our personalities. The guest room was always ready for out-of-town visitors. The kitchen was stocked with ingredients for impromptu dinner parties, and the backyard was designed for entertaining, with comfortable seating areas and string lights that created the perfect ambiance for evening gatherings. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it felt solid, built on mutual respect and shared values. Michael and I didn't fight often, and when we did, it was usually about small things like whose turn it was to take out the trash, or whether we should spend Christmas in Phoenix, or visit my parents in Portland. We were compatible in the ways that seemed to matter most. We both valued financial security. We both wanted kids someday. we both believed in working hard and treating people well. The physical side of our relationship had settled into a comfortable rhythm. We weren't the couple tearing each other's clothes off every night, but we were affectionate, connected, intimate in ways that felt sustainable for the long term. Michael would bring me coffee in bed on Saturday mornings, and I'd massage his shoulders when he'd been hunched over spreadsheets all day. We held hands during movies, fell asleep curled up together, and made time for date nights even when work got busy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I felt secure in a way I'd never experienced before. This wasn't the passionate, volatile love that burns hot and fast. This was the kind of love that builds something lasting, that creates a foundation for the life you want to have 20 years down the road. I could picture us growing old together in this house, hosting our own family gatherings, watching our children play in the backyard pool, becoming the kind of couple that other people looked up to. The only small shadow in this otherwise bright picture was something I could never quite put my finger on. Sometimes during those family gatherings, I'd catch David looking at me in a way that felt just slightly too long, too intense. When he'd hug me hello or goodbye, his hand would linger on my back just a second longer than felt entirely appropriate. When he'd compliment my dress or my hair, there was something in his tone that made me feel slightly uncomfortable, though I could never articulate exactly why. I told myself I was imagining things. David was naturally charismatic, naturally touchy-feely with everyone. He hugged his mother the same way, complimented Jennifer constantly, and had that salesman's gift for making everyone feel special and noticed. I didn't want to be the paranoid sister-in-law who read too much into innocent interactions, especially when everyone else seemed to see David as nothing but charming and wonderful. Besides, Jennifer never seemed concerned. If her own husband was inappropriate with other women, surely she would notice, would say something, would be bothered by it. And Michael adored his brother, looked up to him in many ways, was proud of his success, and grateful for how welcoming David had been to me from the beginning. Creating drama over vague feelings and minor discomfort seemed selfish and potentially destructive to relationships that meant everything to me. So I pushed those moments aside, chalked them up to my own insecurities or misinterpretations. I focused on the bigger picture, on how lucky I was to be part of this family, to have found my place in the world. I concentrated on being the best wife, sister-in-law, and daughter-in-law I could be, on earning my spot in this circle through kindness, loyalty, and genuine care for the people who had opened their hearts to me. As Christmas approached this year, I felt the familiar excitement building. Patricia had been planning for months, sending group texts with menu ideas and decoration themes, coordinating schedules to make sure everyone could attend. Jennifer and I had gone shopping together for new outfits, settling on dresses that were festive but not too formal, perfect for an evening of celebrating with people we loved. Michael had been working long hours leading up to the holidays, trying to close out the year strong for his clients, but he promised that Christmas Eve would be completely work-free. We'd wrapped our gifts together the weekend before, sitting on the living room floor surrounded by ribbons and wrapping paper, sharing a bottle of wine and laughing at my terrible wrapping skills. Everything felt exactly as it should, familiar and warm and right. I had no idea that this Christmas Eve would be the night that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the family I'd believed would always protect me. I couldn't have imagined that the foundation I'd spent 7 years building was about to crumble beneath my feet, or that the person I trusted least to hurt me would be the one to strike the deepest blow. Sometimes the most devastating earthquakes happen along fault lines you never knew existed, in places that seemed solid and safe until the moment they split apart. As I got dressed for Patricia's party that evening, carefully applying my makeup and styling my hair, I was completely unaware that I was preparing for the last night of my old life, the last evening I would spend believing in the version of reality I'd constructed around myself. The dress I chose was deep emerald green, a color that complemented my dark hair and made my eyes look brighter. Jennifer had helped me pick it out, insisting that it was perfect for the holiday season and that the cut was incredibly flattering. As I looked at myself in the bedroom mirror, adjusting the necklace Michael had given me for our anniversary, I felt beautiful and confident, ready to enjoy an evening surrounded by people who loved me. I had no way of knowing that before the night was over, that same dress would feel like a costume I'd been wearing to play a role that no longer existed. That the face looking back at me from mirrors would belong to someone I barely recognized. Someone who had been forced to discover exactly how strong she could be when everything she'd believed in turned out to be built on lies. The warning signs started appearing about 3 weeks before Christmas, though I wouldn't recognize them as warnings until much later. It began with small things, subtle shifts that I dismissed as coincidence or my own overthinking. David had always been friendly, but suddenly he seemed to be everywhere I was. When I stopped by the grocery store after work, he'd appear in the same aisle, claiming he was picking up something Jennifer had forgotten. When I went to my favorite coffee shop on Saturday mornings, he'd walk in just minutes later, acting surprised to see me and insisting we sit together. When I attended my weekly yoga class at the studio near our house, I noticed his silver BMW in the parking lot afterward, even though I'd never seen him there before. Each encounter felt innocent enough on its own. David would make casual conversation about work, ask about Michael's latest projects, mention something funny Jennifer had said, but there was an underlying intensity to these interactions that made me feel slightly off balance. He would stand just a little too close when we talked, maintain eye contact just a beat too long, laugh a little too enthusiastically at things I said that weren't particularly funny. The first incident that truly bothered me happened at the office holiday party. Michael had come with me, looking handsome in his navy suit, and we were having a wonderful time mingling with my colleagues and their spouses. I was in the middle of introducing Michael to my boss when I felt a familiar hand on my lower back. I turned around to find David standing there with a huge smile, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Surprise," he said, handing me one of the glasses. "Jennifer couldn't make it tonight, but I thought I'd crash the party anyway. Hope you don't mind." I was genuinely confused. How had he known about our company party? The invitation had been addressed specifically to Michael and me, and I hadn't mentioned it to anyone in his family. When I asked him about it later, he laughed and said Jennifer had seen the invitation on our refrigerator when she'd stopped by to borrow a book the previous week. That explanation made sense, but something about the whole situation felt orchestrated. David spent the entire evening positioning himself near me, joining conversations I was having with coworkers, touching my arm when he made a point, refilling my drink before I'd even finished it. When the DJ started playing slow songs and couples began dancing, David asked me to dance while Michael was in the bathroom. "Come on, Sarah," he said, extending his hand with that charming smile. "One dance won't hurt anyone." I felt trapped. Saying no would have seemed rude and created an awkward scene in front of my colleagues. So I accepted his hand and let him lead me to the dance floor, telling myself it was just a friendly, family gesture. But as we swayed to the music, David pulled me closer than necessary, his hand pressing firmly against my back, his breath warm against my ear. "You look absolutely stunning tonight," he whispered, his voice carrying an undertone that made my stomach tighten. "That dress is perfect on you. Michael's a lucky man." When the song ended, I stepped back quickly, mumbling something about needing to find Michael. David just smiled and kissed my cheek, letting his lips linger there longer than a brotherly peck should last. I spent the rest of the evening staying close to Michael's side, but I could feel David's eyes following me around the room. On the drive home, Michael was in a great mood, talking about how much fun he'd had meeting my coworkers and how proud he was to show me off. When I mentioned feeling a little uncomfortable with David's behavior, Michael laughed it off. "That's just David being David," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "He's always been overly friendly. Remember when we first started dating and he kept trying to set me up with other women because he thought I could do better? He means well, but he doesn't always have the best social filter. I wanted to press the issue, to explain that this felt different from David's usual gregarious personality, but Michael seemed so happy and relaxed that I didn't want to spoil the mood. Besides, maybe he was right. Maybe I was reading too much into innocent interactions because I was stressed about work or tired from the busy holiday season. But the incidents continued. A few days later, David showed up at my office during lunch, claiming he was in the neighborhood showing a property and thought he'd see if I wanted to grab a bite. We went to a small cafe around the corner, and the conversation started normally enough. He asked about my current marketing campaigns, shared some funny stories about difficult real estate clients, and updated me on Jennifer's latest classroom adventures. But then the conversation took a turn that made me distinctly uncomfortable. David started asking personal questions about my relationship with Michael, probing in ways that felt invasive and inappropriate. "You and Michael seem so settled," he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Almost like an old married couple already. Do you ever miss the excitement of being single? The thrill of meeting someone new?" I shifted in my seat, unsure how to respond. "I'm happy with Michael," I said simply. "I don't miss being single at all." David leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "But don't you ever wonder what it would be like with someone who's more adventurous? Someone who could show you things you've never experienced?" The way he said it, with that slight emphasis and the intensity of his gaze, left no doubt about what he was implying. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, a combination of embarrassment and anger. "I should get back to work," I said, standing up abruptly and reaching for my purse. David caught my wrist gently, his thumb stroking across my skin. "Sarah, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just think you're an incredible woman, and I hate to see you settling for less than you deserve." I pulled my hand away and left, money on the table for my lunch. "I'm not settling for anything, David. Michael and I are perfectly happy." As I walked back to my office, my heart was pounding. There was no mistaking what had just happened. David had crossed a line, made his intentions clear in a way that couldn't be explained away as brotherly concern or friendly conversation. I felt sick thinking about it, confused and angry, and somehow guilty, as if I had done something to encourage his behavior. I considered telling Michael about the lunch, but I knew exactly how that conversation would go. He would find some way to rationalize David's words, to interpret them as something innocent that I had misunderstood. Michael adored his older brother, looked up to him, trusted him completely. The idea that David might be pursuing his wife would be so foreign to Michael's worldview that he simply wouldn't be able to accept it. And what if I was wrong? What if David's comments had been inappropriate, but not necessarily predatory? What if I was overreacting to awkward conversation from someone who'd never been good at reading social cues? I didn't want to be the woman who caused family drama over misunderstandings, especially during the holiday season. So I decided to handle it myself, to maintain appropriate distance from David and hope that he would get the message. I stopped going to places where I might run into him accidentally. I made sure Michael was always present when David was around. I kept conversations light and brief, never allowing him to steer them into personal territory again. For a few days, this strategy seemed to work. David didn't show up unexpectedly anywhere, didn't call or text, didn't create opportunities for private conversations. I started to relax, thinking maybe the lunch had been an aberration, a moment of poor judgment, that he regretted as much as I did. But then Jennifer called with an invitation that complicated everything. "Sarah, I need a huge favor," she said, her voice carrying that slightly frantic tone she got when she was overwhelmed. "My principal scheduled this mandatory teacher training session for next Saturday, which is the same day as my nephew's birthday party. I promised my sister I'd help with the decorations and food, but now I can't be there until evening." She paused, and I could hear her moving around, probably multitasking as usual. David offered to handle everything himself, but you know how men are with party planning. Could you possibly help him out? I know it's a lot to ask, especially on a Saturday, but I'm desperate. My stomach dropped. The last thing I wanted was to spend an entire day alone with David, especially after our uncomfortable lunch, but how could I say no without explaining why? Jennifer was my closest friend in the family, and she was genuinely in a bind. Refusing to help would require an explanation I wasn't prepared to give. Of course, I heard myself saying. What time do you need me there? You're a lifesaver. David said he'd start setting up around 10 in the morning. The party's at 2, so you'd probably be done by early afternoon. I'll make it up to you, I promise. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone, trying to figure out how to get out of the commitment I'd just made. I could call back and claim I'd forgotten about other plans, but Jennifer would see right through such an obvious lie. I could tell Michael about my concerns and ask him to come with me, but that would require admitting that his brother had been inappropriate, something I still wasn't ready to do. In the end, I decided to go through with it but take precautions. I would arrive exactly on time, stay focused on the party preparations, and leave as soon as everything was ready. I would keep my phone handy and maintain a businesslike demeanor. That would discourage any personal conversation. It was just a few hours of hanging balloons and arranging food. How difficult could it be? That Saturday morning, I dressed carefully in jeans and a loose-fitting sweater. Nothing that could be construed as attractive or attention-seeking. I pulled my hair back in a simple ponytail and wore minimal makeup. I wanted to look helpful, but not appealing, friendly, but not flirtatious. David and Jennifer's house was in an upscale neighborhood about 15 minutes from ours, a sprawling 2-story with perfectly manicured landscaping and a circular driveway. I'd been there dozens of times for family gatherings and casual visits, but as I pulled up that morning, it felt different somehow. More isolated, more private, more dangerous. David answered the door before I'd even knocked, as if he'd been watching for my arrival. He was wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt that showed off his athletic build, and his smile was brighter than the Arizona sun. "Sarah, right on time. Come in, come in. I've got coffee brewing and fresh pastries from that bakery Jennifer loves." The house smelled amazing, like cinnamon and vanilla, and I could see he'd already started setting up in the backyard. Tables and chairs were arranged around the pool, and boxes of decorations were stacked neatly on the patio. It looked like he'd put genuine thought into the preparation, which made me feel slightly guilty for my suspicions. "This looks great," I said, following him toward the kitchen. "What do you need me to help with?" "Well, Jennifer left this incredibly detailed list," he said, pulling out a piece of paper covered in her neat handwriting. "Apparently, there's a specific way to hang streamers and a particular pattern for the tablecloths. I swear, sometimes I think she believes I'm completely helpless." He handed me a cup of coffee in one of Jennifer's pretty floral mugs, and I noticed his fingers brushed against mine as I took it. It could have been accidental, but something about the way he smiled afterward made me think it wasn't. We spent the first hour working efficiently, hanging decorations and setting up tables. David was actually quite helpful, taking direction well and working hard to get everything just right. I started to relax, thinking maybe I'd been paranoid about his intentions. This felt like normal family cooperation, the kind of thing we'd done many times before for various celebrations. But as we moved inside to prepare the food, the dynamic began to shift. The kitchen was smaller than the backyard, requiring us to work in closer proximity. Every time I turned around, David seemed to be right there, reaching over me for supplies, standing behind me to see what I was doing, finding excuses to touch my hand or brush against my arm. "You're so good at this," he said, watching me arrange fruit on a platter. "Jennifer's lucky to have such a talented friend. We all are, really." I murmured something polite and noncommittal, focusing intently on the strawberries I was cutting. But David wasn't finished. "You know, Sarah, I've always admired how capable you are. You're beautiful, obviously, but you're also smart and creative and genuinely kind. It's a rare combination." I felt my shoulders tense. "Thank you," I said, quietly, not looking up from my work. "Michael doesn't appreciate how special you are," David continued, moving closer. "He takes you for granted. I can see it at family dinners, the way he barely pays attention when you're talking, the way he just assumes you'll handle everything domestic while he focuses on work." This was exactly the kind of conversation I'd been trying to avoid. "Michael and I are fine, David. We have a good partnership." "Partnership?" David repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what you want from marriage? A business arrangement? What about passion? What about being with someone who truly sees you, who appreciates everything you bring to the table?" I set down my knife and turned to face him, intending to shut down this line of conversation once and for all. But he was standing much closer than I'd realized, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the intensity burning in his eyes. "David, I think we should stick to talking about the party," I said firmly. Instead of backing away, he stepped even closer. "I can't stop thinking about you, Sarah. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. You're all I think about anymore." Before I could respond, before I could step back or protest, his hands were on my waist and he was leaning down to kiss me. I pushed against his chest immediately, turning my face away so his lips caught my cheek instead of my mouth. "Stop," I said sharply, shoving him harder. "David, stop it." He released me immediately but didn't step back. "I'm sorry," he said, though his eyes didn't look sorry at all. "I couldn't help myself. Being around you, working together like this, it feels so natural. Like this is how things should be." I grabbed my purse from the counter, my hands shaking with adrenaline and anger. "I'm leaving. You can finish the rest yourself." "Sarah, wait." He caught my arm as I headed toward the door. "Please don't." "Go. I promise I'll behave. Jennifer's counting on us, and I can't do this party alone." I paused, torn between my desire to get away from him and my loyalty to Jennifer. She was probably already stressed about missing the morning preparations, and if I left now, the party would be a disaster. Her nephew would be disappointed, her sister would be angry, and Jennifer would blame herself for trusting us to handle things. "If I stay," I said slowly, "we work on opposite sides of the kitchen. No more personal conversation. No more comments about Michael or our marriage. We finish the preparations, and then I leave before the party starts." David nodded, eagerly. "Absolutely. Whatever you want. I just got carried away for a moment. It won't happen again." Against my better judgment, I stayed. We finished the food preparation in tense silence, with David respecting the physical and conversational boundaries I'd established. When Jennifer arrived home an hour before the party, everything was perfect. She hugged us both, thanking us profusely for saving the day and making everything beautiful. "You two make such a great team," she said, beaming as she surveyed our work. "I should put you in charge of all the family parties from now on." I forced a smile and made my excuses about needing to get home to Michael. As I drove away, I felt sick with guilt and confusion. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I felt like I was carrying a terrible secret. David's words kept echoing in my head, his accusations about Michael taking me for granted, his declaration that he couldn't stop thinking about me. Part of me was angry at his presumption, his willingness to betray his brother and his wife by pursuing me. But another part of me was disturbed by how his criticism of Michael had hit so close to home. Was it true that Michael took me for granted? Had our relationship become too comfortable, too predictable? When was the last time Michael had looked at me the way David had that morning, with that intensity and desire? I pushed those thoughts away, reminding myself that David was manipulative, using classic predatory tactics to make me question my relationship so I'd be more vulnerable to his advances. Michael might not be the most passionate or demonstrative husband, but he was good to me, faithful to me, and building a life with me based on love and respect. What had happened in Jennifer's kitchen was a violation of trust that I needed to address, but I still wasn't sure how. Telling Jennifer would destroy her marriage and potentially split the family apart. Telling Michael would force him to choose between believing his wife and believing his brother, a position I wasn't sure he was prepared to handle. Creating a confrontation might make things worse, might escalate David's behavior rather than stopping it. In the end, I decided to increase my vigilance and avoid being alone with David again. Christmas was only 2 weeks away, and after the holidays, I could gradually distance myself from family gatherings, creating space until David hopefully lost interest and moved on to some other inappropriate fixation. It seemed like a reasonable plan, a way to protect myself and preserve the family harmony that meant so much to Michael. I had no way of knowing that David had no intention of giving up, that my rejection had only made him more determined, more willing to take risks and cross lines I couldn't even imagine. The final warning sign came exactly 1 week before Christmas Eve, and this time, there was no mistaking it for anything innocent or accidental. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of perfect Arizona weather that made me grateful to live in the desert. The temperature was a comfortable 72 degrees, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of orange blossoms from the citrus trees in our neighborhood. I spent the morning wrapping the last few gifts and preparing the side dishes I'd volunteered to bring to Patricia's party. Michael was in an exceptionally good mood, having finally finished a complex audit that had been consuming his attention for weeks. He helped me load the car with our contributions to the evening, humming Christmas carols and making jokes about how his mother always prepared enough food to feed half of Phoenix. His excitement was infectious, and I found myself looking forward to the celebration despite my lingering anxiety about being around David. I had successfully avoided any private interactions with my brother-in-law since the incident in Jennifer's kitchen. When the whole family went out for dinner the previous weekend, I made sure to sit between Michael and Jennifer, keeping David at a safe distance across the table. When he'd called the house earlier in the week asking to speak with me about some real estate question, I'd politely deflected and handed the phone to Michael instead. My strategy seemed to be working. David had maintained appropriate behavior during our group interactions, keeping conversations general and avoiding the intense eye contact and lingering touches that had made me so uncomfortable. I hoped that my clear rejection had finally gotten through to him, that he'd realized pursuing his brother's wife was both impossible and destructive. Patricia's house looked like a winter wonderland when we arrived, even though there wasn't a snowflake in sight. She'd outdone herself this year with the decorations, wrapping every surface in white lights and silver garland. The massive Christmas tree in the living room was decorated with ornaments collected over decades of family Christmases, each one carrying its own story and memory. The mantle was draped with stockings for every family member, including ones for Michael and me that Patricia had added after our wedding. The party was already in full swing when we walked in, with Patricia's friends and neighbors mingling in the living room while Christmas music played softly in the background. The dining room table was loaded with more food than any reasonable number of people could consume, and the hot chocolate bar was already drawing a crowd of children from the neighborhood families. Jennifer looked stunning in a red dress that complemented her blonde hair perfectly, and she greeted me with the kind of warm hug that reminded me why I treasured our friendship. David was across the room talking to Robert and a few other men, and he gave me a polite wave when our eyes met. Nothing more. I felt myself relax as I settled into the familiar rhythm of Patricia's parties, moving between conversations and helping to keep the food table organized. Michael was in his element, deep in conversation with his father about some new tax regulations that were affecting small businesses. I loved watching him during these family gatherings, seeing how comfortable and confident he became when surrounded by people who knew him best. This was the version of Michael I'd fallen in love with, the one who emerged when he felt completely safe and accepted. The evening progressed beautifully for the first few hours. I caught up with neighbors I only saw at these annual gatherings, cooed over photos of new grandchildren, and shared stories about work and travel plans with Patricia's book club friends. The atmosphere was exactly what I'd hoped for, warm and festive and full of the kind of genuine connection that made the holidays special. Jennifer and I found ourselves in the kitchen around 9 o'clock, refilling serving platters and loading the dishwasher with the first round of dirty glasses. She was telling me about her students' Christmas play, laughing about how one little boy had forgotten his lines and started reciting the Pledge of Allegiance instead of his shepherd's speech. "Sarah, there you are." David's voice behind me made me tense immediately. I turned to see him standing in the kitchen doorway, holding an empty wine glass and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom wants to know if you could help her find the good serving spoons," he said, looking directly at me. "She thinks they might be in the storage room downstairs." Jennifer looked up from the dishwasher. "I can help with that." "Where did she say they were?" "Actually, she specifically asked for Sarah," David replied smoothly. "Something about how you organized things for her last Christmas, and you'd know exactly where to look." I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't organized anything in Patricia's storage room, and the request didn't make sense. Patricia was meticulous about her kitchen organization and would know exactly where her serving pieces were located. But Jennifer was nodding, accepting David's explanation without question. "That's right. You did help Mom reorganize all her serving stuff last year," Jennifer said to me. "You're so much better at that kind of thing than I am." I was trapped. Refusing to help would require an explanation I couldn't give, especially in front of Jennifer. But going downstairs alone with David was exactly the kind of situation I'd been trying to avoid. "I'll come with you," I said carefully, "but let me just finish loading these plates first." "Mom seemed pretty urgent about it," David pressed. "The guests are asking for dessert spoons, and she's getting flustered trying to find them." Jennifer made a shooing motion with her hands. "Go ahead, Sarah. I can finish this. Poor Mom is probably having one of her hosting anxiety moments." With no reasonable way to refuse, I followed David out of the kitchen and toward the basement stairs. The lower level of Patricia's house was finished but rarely used during parties, containing a family room, storage areas, and Robert's home office. It was quieter down there, removed from the noise and energy of the celebration upstairs. David led me toward a storage room at the far end of the basement, past the family room where a few teenagers were playing video games. The storage area was lined with metal shelving units holding boxes of holiday decorations, old photo albums, and various household items that Patricia couldn't bear to throw away but didn't need regularly. "I think she said they were in one of these boxes," David said, gesturing vaguely toward the shelves. "Probably labeled with something about kitchen supplies." I began scanning the box labels, looking for anything that might contain serving pieces. Most were clearly marked with contents like Christmas ornaments or Michael's baby clothes, making it obvious that this was a fool's errand. There were no boxes labeled as kitchen supplies, and Patricia would never store frequently used serving pieces in such an inconvenient location. "David, I don't think the spoons are down here," I said, turning to face him. "Maybe we should go ask your mother, directly where she keeps them." "Us?" But when I turned around, David was standing much closer than I expected, and his expression had changed completely. The polite mask he'd been wearing upstairs was gone, replaced by something intense and predatory that made my stomach drop. "There are no spoons, Sarah," he said quietly. "I needed to get you alone so we could finish the conversation we started at Jennifer's house." I backed up until I hit the shelving unit behind me, my heart starting to race. "David, this isn't appropriate. People will notice we're missing." "No one's going to notice anything," he replied, stepping closer. "Jennifer thinks you're helping Mom. Mom thinks you're helping Jennifer. And Michael is so absorbed in his conversation, with Dad that he probably hasn't even realized you left the room. He was right, and we both knew it. During these large family gatherings, people moved around constantly, helping with food, checking on children, stepping outside for fresh air. It could be 20 minutes or more before anyone specifically looked for either of us. "I've been thinking about what you said at the birthday party," David continued, reaching out to touch my arm, "about how we needed to maintain boundaries. But I can't stop thinking about you, Sarah, about how perfect we would be together." I jerked my arm away from his touch. "David, stop. This has to stop. I'm married to your brother. You're married to my best friend. What you're suggesting would destroy everything." "Michael doesn't deserve you," David said, his voice growing more passionate. "He treats you like a roommate, not like a woman. When was the last time he surprised you with anything? When was the last time he looked at you like you were the most beautiful woman in the world?" His words hit their target because they contained just enough truth to sting. Michael and I had settled into comfortable routines, and while I valued our stability, there were times when I missed the excitement of early romance. But that didn't mean I wanted to blow up my life for an affair with his brother. "My marriage isn't perfect, but it's mine," I said firmly. "And even if it wasn't, you would be the last person I'd turn to." "You're willing to betray your own brother and your wife. What makes you think you'd treat me any better?" David's expression darkened. "You think you're better than me? You think your little suburban life with my boring brother is some kind of fairy tale?" The change in his tone frightened me. The charming, persuasive David was gone, replaced by someone angry and potentially dangerous. I tried to move toward the door, but he blocked my path. "Let me pass, David. I want to go back upstairs." "Not until you listen to what I have to say," he replied, his voice getting louder. "I've been patient with you, Sarah. I've been respectful of your marriage, even though I could offer you so much more than Michael ever could. But my patience is running out." "Your patience?" I couldn't hide my disbelief. "You call cornering me in dark basements and trying to kiss me in your wife's kitchen being patient and respectful?" "I call it giving you time to realize what you really want," David shot back. "But if you're too scared to admit it, maybe I need to help you figure it out." Before I could react, he grabbed my shoulders and pushed me back against the shelving unit, pressing his body against mine. I could smell the wine on his breath as he leaned down to kiss me, and I turned my head sharply to avoid his mouth. "Get off me," I said loudly, pushing against his chest with both hands. "Stop fighting this, Sarah," David panted, trying to hold my face still with one hand while the other grabbed at my waist. "You know you want this. I've seen the way you look at me." I had never looked at him with anything but family affection, and his delusion terrified me more than his physical aggression. If he truly believed I'd been encouraging him, then he was capable of justifying almost anything he did to me. "Help!" I called out, hoping the teenagers in the family room might hear me. "Somebody help me!" David clamped his hand over my mouth, his eyes wild with panic and anger. "Shut up! Do you want to ruin Christmas for everyone? Do you want to destroy 2 marriages over one simple kiss?" I bit down hard on his hand and he jerked it away with a curse. The moment his hand moved, I screamed as loudly as I could, hoping someone upstairs would hear me over the party noise. "Help me! Michael! Somebody help me!" David grabbed my throat, not squeezing but applying just enough pressure to make his threat clear. "Stop screaming, or I'll give you something to really scream about." But my cries had been heard. I could hear footsteps on the basement stairs, multiple sets, moving quickly. David heard them too and released me immediately, stepping back and straightening his clothes. "Remember," he hissed quietly, "it's your word against mine." And everyone knows how much this family means to me. Michael appeared in the doorway first, followed by Jennifer and Robert. They took in the scene quickly, me pressed against the shelving unit with my hair disheveled and my dress twisted. David standing several feet away trying to look casual, both of us breathing heavily. "What's going on down here?" Michael asked, looking confused. "Sarah, we heard you screaming." I opened my mouth to answer, but David spoke first. "Sarah slipped trying to reach something on the top shelf," he said smoothly. "I was trying to help her, but she panicked when she thought she was going to fall. You know how she is about heights." It was a plausible explanation. I did have a fear of heights, and reaching for something on a high shelf could reasonably cause me to panic. But the explanation felt like another violation, using my personal fears and vulnerabilities to cover up his assault. "Is that what happened?" "Sarah?" Jennifer asked, concern evident in her voice. "Are you hurt?" I looked around at their faces, Michael's confusion, Jennifer's worry, Robert's paternal concern. They were all waiting for me to confirm David's story, to laugh off the incident and return to the party. It would be so easy to go along with his lie, to preserve the peace and avoid the confrontation that would surely destroy the family. But, as I stood there in that storage room, pressed against the shelves where David had cornered me, I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend that what had just happened was innocent. Couldn't protect a man who had threatened and assaulted. Me couldn't prioritize family harmony over my own safety and dignity. "No," I said clearly, my voice stronger than I felt. "That's not what happened at all." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. David's face went pale, while Michael's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. David cornered me down here, I continued, looking directly at my husband. "He's been pursuing me for weeks, making inappropriate comments, showing up places where I go, trying to convince me to have an affair with him. Tonight, he lured me down here under false pretenses and then physically assaulted me." "That's insane," David said quickly, his voice rising. "Sarah, what are you talking about? I was trying to help you find Mom's serving spoons." "There are no serving spoons down here," I replied firmly. "You made that up to get me alone. You grabbed me, tried to kiss me, put your hand over my mouth when I screamed for help, and threatened me when I fought back." Jennifer was staring at her husband with dawning horror, while Robert looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. But it was Michael's reaction that broke my heart. Instead of immediately supporting me, instead of confronting his brother, he looked back and forth between us with obvious skepticism. "Sarah, that's a serious accusation," Michael said slowly. "Are you sure you didn't misunderstand something? David would never—" "Michael!" My voice cut through his words like ice. "Are you seriously questioning whether I know the difference between being helped and being assaulted?" The silence that followed was deafening. Upstairs, I could hear the party continuing, people laughing and talking, completely unaware that the foundation of our family was crumbling in the basement below them. David seized on Michael's hesitation to press his advantage. "Sarah's been under a lot of stress at work lately," he said, his voice full of fake concern. "And she's been drinking tonight. Maybe she misinterpreted my trying to help her as something, It was masterfully done. He'd planted seeds of doubt about my mental state, my sobriety, and my perception of events. He'd positioned himself as the concerned brother-in-law worried about my well-being, while making me sound like a hysterical woman making false accusations. But he'd made one crucial mistake. Jennifer knew me better than anyone in that room, and she could see the truth written all over my face. "David," Jennifer said quietly, her voice trembling, "look me in the eye and tell me Sarah is lying." For just a moment, David's mask slipped. I saw panic flash across his features before he regained control, but it was too late. Jennifer had seen it too. "I can't believe you're all taking this seriously," David said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Sarah, I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable somehow, but I was just trying to help. Maybe we should all go back upstairs and—" "No." Jennifer's voice was stronger now, filled with a steel I'd never heard before. "We're not going anywhere until we figure out exactly what happened down here." She turned to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sarah, I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." So I did. Standing in that basement storage room, surrounded by the detritus of family memories and broken trust, I told them everything. The unexpected encounters at coffee shops and grocery stores, the inappropriate comments about my marriage, the lunch where he'd asked if I missed being single, the incident at the birthday party setup where he'd tried to kiss me and I'd had to threaten to leave. With each revelation, Jennifer's face grew paler and Michael's expression grew more troubled. Robert stood silently, his hands clenched into fists, looking like he was physically restraining himself from violence. David tried to interrupt several times, offering alternative explanations and accusing me of misremembering or overreacting. But Jennifer shut him down each time, demanding that I be allowed to finish my account. When I was done, the silence stretched out like a chasm none of us knew how to cross. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment and disgust. "David, is this true?" "Dad, you can't seriously believe—" "Answer the question." Robert's tone brooked no argument. "Did you pursue your brother's wife? Did you assault her tonight?" David looked around the room, perhaps searching for an ally or an escape route. Finding neither, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said quietly. Sarah is so beautiful, so intelligent, and Michael doesn't appreciate what he has. I thought maybe she felt the same way about me." The confession hit the room like a physical blow. Jennifer made a small, wounded sound and stepped back from her husband as if he'd struck her. Michael stared at his brother with an expression of absolute betrayal. "You thought she felt the same way?" Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper. "So you decided to corner her in a basement and force yourself on her?" "I wasn't forcing anything," David protested. "I was just trying to show her how I felt. I thought if she could see how passionate I am about her—" "You grabbed her throat," Michael interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "Sarah said you grabbed her throat." David's face crumpled. "I was just trying to keep her from screaming and ruining Christmas for everyone. I wasn't going to hurt her." "You were hurting her," Robert said, his voice shaking with rage. "You were attacking your brother's wife in my house during a family celebration, while your own wife was upstairs helping with the party." The full weight of David's betrayal was settling over all of us. He hadn't just violated me, he'd betrayed Michael, Jennifer, his parents, and the entire foundation of our family's trust. He'd been willing to destroy everything we'd built together for his own selfish desires. Jennifer was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she stared at the man she'd married. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you been obsessed with Sarah?" David couldn't meet her eyes. "It wasn't obsession. It was love." "Don't you dare call it love," I said, finding my voice again. "Love doesn't corner people in basements. Love doesn't ignore someone's clear rejection. Love doesn't threaten and assault. What you felt was possession, entitlement, and lust. Nothing more." Michael finally seemed to shake off his shock and stepped closer to his brother. "Get out," he said simply. "Michael, please, let me explain. Get out of this house. Get out of our lives. I never want to see you again." David looked around the room one more time, perhaps hoping someone would defend him or offer him forgiveness. But we all just stared back at him with expressions ranging from disgust to heartbreak. He left without another word, pushing past us and heading up the basement stairs. A few minutes later, we heard the front door slam and his car start in the driveway. Jennifer collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking with sobs. I went to her immediately, wrapping my arms around her and letting her cry against my shoulder. She clung to me like a drowning person, and I held her tight, both of us grieving for the family we'd thought we had. Michael and Robert stood frozen, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in the span of 20 minutes. The party was still going on upstairs, but our world had been irrevocably shattered. "We have to tell Mom," Robert said finally. Michael nodded. "And we have to figure out what to tell everyone else." But I knew that the details of explanation and family management would come later. For now, we just sat in that basement storage room, surrounded by boxes of memories from happier times, trying to process the fact that Christmas Eve had become the night our family died. The aftermath of that Christmas Eve confrontation stretched into the most challenging months of my life. Patricia had to be told what happened, which meant watching this strong, composed woman crumble as she realized one of her sons had attacked the other's wife in her own home. The party ended abruptly, with confused guests being given vague explanations about a family emergency, while Patricia disappeared into her bedroom and didn't emerge for hours. Robert took charge of the immediate situation, calling the remaining family members aside and explaining what had occurred. The reactions ranged from shock to disbelief to anger, but what surprised me most was how quickly the family began to fracture along unexpected lines. While Michael and his parents rallied around me, other relatives started questioning whether I might have somehow encouraged David's behavior. The whisper campaign began within days. David's version of events, carefully crafted and strategically distributed, painted me as an unhappy wife who had been flirting with him for months before crying assault when things went too far. He claimed I'd been the one pursuing him, showing up at places where he worked, asking him personal questions about his marriage, making suggestive comments that he'd tried to ignore out of loyalty to Michael. His story was insidious because it contained just enough elements that could be twisted to seem plausible. Yes, I had run into him at various places around town, but he'd been the one orchestrating those encounters. Yes, we'd had personal conversations, but he'd been the one steering them toward inappropriate territory. Yes, I had helped him with Jennifer's nephew's birthday party, but only because Jennifer had asked me to, and I'd tried to maintain boundaries throughout. The first person to confront me with these doubts was Michael's Aunt Caroline, Patricia's younger sister, who had always been competitive with her and critical of her family's choices. She called me 3 days after Christmas, her voice dripping with false concern. "Sarah, dear, I've been so worried about you since I heard what happened," she began. But there was something calculating in her tone that immediately put me on guard. "I just want you to know that whatever mistakes you might have made, families should stick together through difficult times." I gripped the phone tighter. "What mistakes are you referring to, Caroline?" "Well, honey, David is devastated about how everything has been misunderstood. He's been telling people that you two developed feelings for each other, but he's taking full responsibility for not handling the situation appropriately. He says he should have talked to Michael directly, instead of letting things get so complicated." The audacity of his revisionist history took my breath away. "Caroline, David assaulted me. He cornered me in a basement and put his hands on me against my will. There were no mutual feelings, no complicated situation, and no misunderstanding." "Now, Sarah," Caroline's voice took on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "You're a beautiful young woman, and sometimes men misread signals. Maybe David thought you were interested because you were being friendly. Maybe he was just trying to be supportive during what he perceived as problems in your marriage." "Problems? In my marriage?" I couldn't hide my incredulity. "Caroline, what exactly has David been telling people?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear her deciding how much to reveal. "He's mentioned that you've seemed unhappy lately, that you've talked to him about feeling unappreciated by Michael. He's worried that you might be using this situation to deflect attention from your own marital issues." I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. Every word I'd ever spoken to David in confidence, every moment of normal human vulnerability I'd shared during family conversations, was being weaponized against me. He was turning my natural openness and trust into evidence of some imaginary conspiracy. "Caroline, I want to be very clear about something," I said, my voice shaking with controlled anger. David has been pursuing me inappropriately for weeks. I rejected his advances repeatedly. On Christmas Eve, he lured me to an isolated area under false pretenses and physically assaulted me. If he's telling people otherwise, he's lying. There's no need to get upset, dear, Caroline replied smoothly. I'm just saying that sometimes these situations are more complicated than they appear. Maybe you could consider family counseling, or perhaps some individual therapy to work through whatever underlying issues might have contributed to this unfortunate incident. I hung up on her. Actually hung up the phone while she was still talking. Something I'd never done to a family member before. But her victim blaming and her willingness to accept David's lies over my truth was more than I could tolerate. Unfortunately, Caroline wasn't the only one spreading doubt about my version of events. Over the next few weeks, I discovered that David had been methodically reaching out to extended family members, mutual friends, and even some of our neighbors, carefully, planting seeds of his alternative narrative. He told Michael's cousin that I'd been having marital problems and might be looking for an exit strategy. He mentioned to neighbors that he'd been concerned about my drinking and thought I might need help. He suggested to family friends that I'd been flirting with him at gatherings and that he was worried about my stability. Each story was different, tailored to the specific person he was telling and designed to make me seem unreliable, unstable, or culpable in some way. But they all shared the common thread of positioning him as the concerned family member trying to help a troubled woman who had turned on him when he tried to set appropriate boundaries. The most devastating blow came when Jennifer's mother called me. Barbara had always been kind to me, welcoming me into their extended family circle with genuine warmth. Her call felt like a lifeline until I realized what she was actually saying. "Sarah, I'm so confused about everything that's happening," Barbara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Jennifer is heartbroken, and David is saying such different things than what you've told people. I don't know what to believe anymore." "Barbara, I understand this is difficult," I replied carefully. But Jennifer was there that night. She saw David's reaction when I told the truth. She knows I'm not lying. "That's just it, though," Barbara continued. "Jennifer says David admitted to having feelings for you, but she's not sure about the rest of it. She's wondering if maybe you two had been having an emotional affair and things just got out of hand." My heart stopped. If Jennifer, my closest friend in the family, was starting to doubt my account of what happened, then David's manipulation was working better than I'd feared. "Did Jennifer tell you that directly?" I asked. "Well, no," Barbara admitted. "But David said she's been questioning things, wondering if there were signs she missed about you two having a relationship. He says she's feeling guilty for not recognizing the situation sooner." I realized that David was playing both sides, telling Jennifer's family that she was doubting me while probably telling Jennifer that her family was pressuring him. He was creating confusion and mistrust on all fronts, making it impossible for anyone to get a clear picture of the truth. That afternoon, I drove to Jennifer's house. She answered the door looking like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red and swollen from crying. When she saw me, she burst into fresh tears. "Sarah, I don't know what to think anymore," she sobbed as I held her in her foyer. "David keeps saying different things, and people keep calling me with different versions of what happened. I feel like I'm going crazy." We sat in her living room, surrounded by the Christmas decorations that now seemed like artifacts from a different lifetime. Jennifer curled up in the corner of her couch, clutching a tissue box, while I tried to figure out how to help her navigate through David's web of lies. "Jennifer, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "David has been lying to people. He's been telling different stories to different family members, making it seem like we had some kind of relationship or that I encouraged his behavior. None of that is true." "But why would he lie about something like that?" Jennifer asked. "It doesn't make sense. If he really did assault you, why wouldn't he just disappear and hope everyone forgot about it?" It was a reasonable question, and it highlighted the sophistication of David's manipulation. A guilty person might indeed try to lay low and hope the situation blew over. But David was doing the opposite, actively working to control the narrative and discredit me. He's lying because he knows that if people believe me, his life is over, I explained. His marriage, his relationship with his family, his reputation, in the community, his business, everything would be destroyed. So he's trying to rewrite history to make himself the victim. Jennifer nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes. Sarah, can I ask you something? And please don't get angry with me for asking. Of course. Did you ever have feelings for David? Even a little bit? Even feelings you didn't act on? The question felt like a betrayal, but I could see the genuine anguish in Jennifer's face. She was trying to make sense of a situation that had destroyed her world, and she was grasping for any explanation that might make the pain more bearable. Jennifer, I never had romantic feelings for David, I said firmly. Never. I loved him as a brother-in-law. I enjoyed his company at family gatherings, and I appreciated how welcoming he was when I married Michael. But there was never anything romantic or sexual in my feelings toward him. But he says you told him you were unhappy with Michael? That you talked to him about problems in your marriage? I closed my eyes, trying to remember any conversations that could be twisted to support that claim. Jennifer, over the years, I've probably mentioned minor frustrations with Michael, the same way any married person talks about their spouse. Maybe I complained that he works too much, or that he's not very romantic, or that he doesn't help enough around the house. But those were normal marital gripes, not expressions of dissatisfaction with my marriage or invitations for David to pursue me. Jennifer was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. Finally, she looked up at me with fresh tears in her eyes. Sarah, I want to believe you. I do believe you. But everyone keeps saying that there must be more to the story, that these things don't happen in a vacuum. David's family is saying you must have given him some kind of encouragement, and my family is saying that maybe you're exaggerating what happened because you feel guilty about leading him on. The weight of fighting against an entire network of people who were determined to find me partially culpable was exhausting. I felt like I was drowning in doubt and accusation, even from people who claimed to care about me. Jennifer, I need to ask you something, I said. That night in the basement when you saw us, what did you see? Not what people have told you? Since then, not what David has claimed, but what you actually witnessed with your own eyes. Jennifer took a shaky breath. I saw you pressed against the shelving, looking terrified and disheveled. I saw David standing away from you, but he looked panicked and guilty. When you said he had assaulted you, his face went white, and he immediately started making excuses. And then when Dad demanded the truth, David admitted that he'd been pursuing you. Does that sound like a mutual relationship that got out of hand? I asked gently. No, Jennifer whispered. It doesn't. It sounds like exactly what you said it was. We held each other and cried then, grieving for the family we'd lost and the innocence that had been shattered. But even as Jennifer reaffirmed her belief in my truth, I knew that others would continue to question and blame me. The pressure intensified when Michael's grandmother, the family matriarch who commanded respect from everyone, weighed in on the situation. Grandma Rose was 87 years old and had been the backbone of the family for decades. Her opinion carried enormous weight, which made her phone call to me particularly devastating. Sarah, dear, I've been hearing terrible things about what happened at Christmas, she began, her voice frail but determined. I've known David since he was a little boy, and I just cannot believe he would do the things you're accusing him of. My heart sank. If Grandma Rose didn't believe me, it would give permission for others to openly question my account. Grandma, Rose, I understand this is difficult to accept, I said carefully. But David did assault me. I would never lie about something like that. Now, sweetheart, I'm not saying you're lying, she replied, but her tone suggested otherwise. I'm just wondering if maybe you misunderstood his intentions. David has always been an affectionate person, very demonstrative with his feelings. Maybe what seemed threatening to you was just his way of trying to be supportive." Grandma rose. "He grabbed my throat," I said bluntly. He put his hand over my mouth to stop me from screaming. There's no way to misunderstand that as supportive behavior. "Well, that does sound concerning," she admitted. "But David says you were having some kind of emotional breakdown, that you were talking about wanting to leave Michael, and that you threw yourself at him. He says he was just trying to calm you down when you started screaming." Another lie, more sophisticated than the others. David was now claiming that I'd been the aggressor, that he'd been the one trying to maintain appropriate boundaries while I pursued him. It was a complete inversion of reality, but it provided a narrative that allowed people to sympathize with him while blaming me for the entire situation. "That's not what happened," I said firmly. "David has been pursuing me for weeks. I rejected him repeatedly. On Christmas Eve, he cornered me and assaulted me. Everything else he's telling people is a lie designed to protect himself." Grandma Rose was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, honey, I've lived a long time, and I've seen a lot of family drama. Sometimes when people are unhappy in their marriages, they make poor choices and then feel ashamed about those choices. If you made a mistake with David, the family would forgive you if you were honest about what really happened." I felt like screaming. Even this woman who had known me for 7 years, who had welcomed me into the family with open arms, was more willing to believe that I was a liar and a cheat than to accept that her golden grandson was capable of assault. "I didn't make any mistakes, Grandma Rose," I said, my voice breaking. "I was victimized by someone I trusted, and now I'm being victimized again by people who would rather blame me than acknowledge the truth." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and sobbed. The isolation was overwhelming. Even with Michael, Jennifer, Patricia, and Robert on my side, the constant questioning and accusations from other family members were wearing me down. I began to doubt my own memory, wondering if I had somehow given David mixed signals or misinterpreted his actions. But then I would remember the fear I'd felt in that basement, the violation of his hands on my body, the threat in his voice when he told me to stop screaming. Those memories were crystal clear, untainted by doubt or confusion. I knew what had happened to me, even if others chose not to believe it. The situation at work became complicated as well. I hadn't told my colleagues the details of what happened, simply explaining that there had been a family emergency over the holidays. But Phoenix's professional community was smaller than people realized, and word began to spread through the network of real estate agents, accountants, and other business professionals who knew both Michael and David. My boss, Linda, called me into her office in mid-January to discuss what she diplomatically termed personal matters affecting my professional reputation. She'd heard rumors about a family scandal involving inappropriate behavior, and she wanted to make sure it wouldn't impact my ability to represent the company effectively. "Sarah, I don't need to know the details of your private life," Linda said, her tone carefully neutral. "But I do need to know that any personal issues you're dealing with won't affect your work or create problems with our clients." I assured her that my performance wouldn't be impacted, but I could see the concern in her eyes. In a business built on relationships and trust, even unfounded rumors could be damaging. I began to worry that David's lies might eventually cost me my job. The stress was taking a physical toll as well. I wasn't sleeping well, often lying awake, replaying conversations and wondering if I could have said something different to make people believe me. I'd lost weight from lack of appetite, and my friends commented that I looked tired and strained. Michael was struggling too, caught between supporting me and dealing with the guilt and anger of having a brother who had betrayed him so completely. He'd cut off all contact with David, but the loss of that relationship was painful for him. He'd looked up to his older brother his entire life, and discovering that David was capable of assault and lies was shattering his understanding of their family. "Sometimes I wonder if I missed signs," Michael confided to me one evening as we sat by our pool, trying to find some peace in the familiar routine of our backyard sanctuary. Maybe David had problems I didn't see, or maybe he resented me for some reason and targeted you to hurt me. This isn't about you, Michael, I reminded him. David made a choice to pursue me and then to assault me. He made another choice to lie about it afterward. Those were his decisions, not consequences of anything you did or didn't do. I know that intellectually, Michael replied, but it's hard not to feel responsible somehow, like I should have protected you better or noticed what was happening sooner. We were both learning that trauma doesn't just affect the primary victim. The ripple effects spread through entire families, damaging relationships and creating secondary wounds that could take years to heal. The final blow came when Patricia called to tell me that David was threatening legal action against me for defamation. He claimed that my false accusations were damaging his business and his reputation, and he wanted me to publicly retract my statements and apologize for the misunderstanding. He's saying that if you don't clear his name, he'll sue you for everything you have, Patricia said, her voice heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. Sarah, I know what he did to you, and I'll support you no matter what. But I wanted you to know what he's planning. The threat of a lawsuit was terrifying, not because I doubted the truth of my account, but because I knew how expensive and emotionally draining legal battles could be. David had money and connections in the community. He could afford to drag out a court case for years, forcing me to relive the assault over and over while spending our savings on attorney fees. But as I sat with Patricia's warning, I realized something important. David's escalating threats and lies weren't signs of strength. They were signs of desperation. If he truly believed his version of events would hold up under scrutiny, he wouldn't need to threaten me into silence. His willingness to destroy relationships and make enemies within his own family showed that he was panicking, grasping for control as his carefully constructed image crumbled. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt a spark of determination instead of fear. David might be willing to lie and manipulate and threaten, but I had something he didn't, the truth. And eventually, the truth has a way of winning, even when it's complicated and painful and inconvenient for everyone involved. I wasn't going to retract anything. I wasn't going to apologize for being assaulted, and I wasn't going to let David's threats silence me or make me doubt what I knew to be true. The battle for my reputation and my truth was far from over, but I was finally ready to fight back. The turning point came in February, exactly 6 weeks after that devastating Christmas Eve. I was sitting in my lawyer's office, having finally decided to take David's legal threats seriously enough to seek professional counsel. My attorney, Maria Gonzalez, was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in harassment and defamation cases. She listened to my entire story without interruption, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions. Sarah, I want you to understand something very clearly, Maria said after I'd finished recounting everything. David's threat to sue you for defamation is almost certainly a bluff. In order to prove defamation, he would have to prove that your statements about him are false. Given that he's already admitted to pursuing you and having inappropriate feelings, and given that there were witnesses to his confession, he has no viable defamation case. Her words were the first ray of hope I'd felt in weeks. So you don't think he'll actually follow through? Men like David rely on intimidation because they know their actual legal position is weak, Maria explained. He's hoping you'll be scared enough to back down and give him the public vindication he needs to repair his reputation. But if he actually filed a lawsuit, he'd be opening himself up to discovery, depositions, and cross-examination under oath. That's the last thing he wants. Maria leaned forward across her desk. In fact, I think we should consider flipping the script entirely. You have grounds for a restraining order based on his harassment pattern and potentially a civil suit. For assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation based on the lies he's been spreading about you. The idea of taking legal action against David hadn't occurred to me. I'd been so focused on defending myself against his attacks that I hadn't considered going on the offensive. But as Maria explained my options, I felt something shifting inside. Me, a transition from victim to fighter. What would that involve? I asked. We'd document everything. Every inappropriate encounter. Every lie he's told family members. Every threat he's made. We'd interview witnesses, including the family members who were present during his confession. We'd create a timeline that shows the pattern of escalation leading to the assault. And then we'd make him face the consequences of his actions in a courtroom. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. Legal action would mean making everything public, potentially dividing the family even further, and enduring months or years of litigation. But it would also mean refusing to be silenced, standing up for myself in a way that might protect other women from David's predatory behavior. I told Maria I needed time to think about it, but as I drove home from her office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Simply knowing that I had options, that I wasn't powerless against David's manipulation, gave me strength I'd forgotten I possessed. That evening, Michael and I had the most honest conversation we'd had since Christmas Eve. I told him about my meeting with Maria and the possibility of taking legal action against his brother. His initial reaction was complicated. Part of him was proud of me for considering it, but another part was clearly struggling with the idea of a public legal battle against David. "I'll support whatever you decide," Michael said finally. "But I need you to know that if you sue David, it will probably destroy what's left of my relationship with my parents. They're already struggling to process what happened, and a lawsuit would force them to choose sides publicly." It was a fair point, and one I'd been considering myself. Patricia and Robert had been supportive of me, but they were also grieving the loss of their vision of David. A legal battle would make their private family trauma into a public spectacle, potentially affecting Robert's business reputation and Patricia's standing in their social circle. "Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said. "Do you think I should just let this go? Accept David's version of events? Apologize for the misunderstanding, and try to move on?" Michael was quiet for a long time, staring out at our backyard pool where we'd spent so many peaceful evenings. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm with conviction. "No, absolutely not. What David did to you was wrong, and what he's doing now with these lies and threats is even worse. I've been so focused on trying to preserve the family that I lost sight of what's actually important here. You were assaulted, and you deserve justice, even if that justice comes at the cost of family harmony." His words broke something open, inside me that I'd been holding closed for weeks. I cried then, not tears of sadness or fear, but tears of relief and validation. Having my husband's unequivocal support gave me the courage I needed to make my decision. The next morning, I called Maria and told her to proceed with filing a restraining order and exploring our options for a civil lawsuit. Within days, David was served with legal papers that prohibited him from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, and from making any further public statements about me or our family situation. The restraining order had an immediate effect that surprised me. Several family members who had been pressuring me to work things out with David suddenly became much more supportive. Apparently, the legal validation of my claims made them take the situation more seriously than my word alone had accomplished. Jennifer's mother, Barbara, called me the day after the restraining order was served. Her tone was completely different from our previous conversation. "Sarah, honey, I owe you an enormous apology," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I let David confuse me with his lies, and I doubted you when I should have been supporting you. I'm so ashamed of how I handled this." "Barbara, you were trying to make sense of an impossible situation," I replied. "David is very good at manipulation. He had years of practice being charming and convincing. That's no excuse for not believing you," Barbara insisted. You've been nothing but honest and kind to our family for years. I should have trusted your character instead of listening to his stories." Similar conversations happened with other family members over the following weeks. It was as if the legal proceedings had given them permission to acknowledge what they'd probably known all along, that David's behavior had been inappropriate and my account was truthful. But the most significant change came from an unexpected source. David's business partner, a man named Gary, whom I'd met at a few family gatherings, reached out to me through Maria's office. He wanted to provide information that might be relevant to my case. Gary revealed that David had a history of inappropriate behavior with female clients and employees that the real estate firm had been quietly managing for years. There had been complaints, settlements, and warnings that David had somehow kept hidden from his family. Gary had been documenting these incidents because he was concerned about liability for their business. David always managed to charm his way out of serious consequences, Gary explained during a meeting at Maria's office. He'd convince the women that they'd misunderstood his intentions, or he'd claim they were trying to extort him, or he'd offer them financial settlements in exchange for their silence. But there's been a pattern for at least 5 years. This information was devastating to David's credibility and immensely helpful to my case. It showed that his assault on me wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment, but part of a long-standing pattern of predatory behavior. Gary provided documentation of complaints, settlement agreements, and internal company memos that painted a picture of a man who regularly crossed boundaries with women in vulnerable positions. Armed with this evidence, Maria was able to build a compelling case that went far beyond a simple he-said-she-said dispute. We had witnesses, documentation, a clear pattern of behavior, and David's own admission of inappropriate feelings for me. When Maria presented this evidence to David's attorney, the response was immediate and decisive. David agreed to a settlement that included a formal written apology, a substantial financial payment, and an agreement to undergo counseling for his behavior. Most importantly, he agreed to make no further public statements about me or our family situation, effectively ending his campaign of lies and manipulation. The written apology was particularly satisfying. In it, David acknowledged that he had pursued me inappropriately, that he had assaulted me on Christmas Eve, and that his subsequent statements about our interactions had been false. He admitted that I had never encouraged his behavior or participated in any kind of relationship with him. The apology was required to be sent to every family member and mutual acquaintance who had received his false version of events. Jennifer called me crying after she received David's apology letter. "Sarah, I'm so sorry I ever doubted you," she sobbed. "I feel like such a fool for letting him confuse me with his lies." "Jennifer, you were married to him," I said gently. "You wanted to believe the best about the man you'd committed your life to. That's not foolish. That's human." "I'm filing for divorce," she announced. "I can't stay married to someone who would assault my best friend and then lie about it for months. I can't trust him anymore, and I can't respect him anymore." Jennifer's decision to divorce David sent shockwaves through both our families, but it also sent a clear message about the consequences of his actions. He hadn't just lost his relationship with me and Michael. He'd lost his marriage, his relationship with his parents, his standing in the community, and eventually his business partnership when Gary decided he couldn't continue working with someone who had such a documented history of harassment. The settlement money allowed me to take some time off work to recover from the emotional trauma of the past few months. I used that time to focus on healing, both individually and within my marriage. Michael and I started couples counseling to work through the ways this experience had affected our relationship and communication. One of the most important things I learned in therapy was that trauma doesn't just disappear once the immediate threat is removed. Even though David was legally prohibited from contacting me, even though his lies had been publicly exposed, even though I'd achieved the vindication I'd been seeking, I still struggled with anxiety, hypervigilance, and trust issues. My therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chen helped me understand that healing from assault and betrayal is a process, not an event. "You've won an important battle for your safety and your truth," she explained. "But now you need to do the work of reclaiming your sense of security and rebuilding your confidence in your own judgment." That work was harder than the legal battle had been. It involved confronting all the ways David's manipulation had made me doubt myself, examining the family dynamics that had allowed his behavior to continue unchecked, and learning to trust my instincts again after months of having them questioned and dismissed. But gradually, I began to feel stronger and more confident. I returned to work with renewed focus and energy. I reconnected with friends I'd been too embarrassed to see during the worst of the family drama. I started setting clearer boundaries in all my relationships, refusing to accept behavior that made me uncomfortable, regardless of who was exhibiting it. Michael and I emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of each other and a stronger commitment to our marriage. The crisis had tested us in ways we never could have anticipated, but it had also shown us that we could face serious challenges together and come out stronger on the other side. In May, about 5 months after the Christmas Eve incident, Patricia called to invite us to a small family gathering at her house. It was the first time she'd hosted anything since the holidays, and I could hear the nervousness in her voice as she extended the invitation. "I know this might be difficult for you, Sarah," she said, "but I miss having family dinners, and I miss having you and Michael here. It would just be Robert and me, you two, and Jennifer, a chance to start rebuilding some of what we lost." I accepted the invitation, though I felt anxious about returning to the house where so much trauma had occurred. When we arrived, Patricia had prepared all my favorite dishes, and she hugged me tighter and longer than she ever had before. "I'm so proud of how you handled everything," she whispered in my ear. "You showed more courage and integrity than anyone should have to show. You saved our family from continuing to enable David's behavior." The dinner was emotional, but healing. We talked openly about what had happened, about the mistakes that had been made, about the lessons we'd all learned. Patricia and Robert expressed their regret for the family members who had doubted me, and they shared their own struggles with accepting that the son they'd raised was capable of such behavior. Jennifer looked healthier than she had in months. The divorce proceedings were difficult, but she seemed relieved to be free from the marriage to a man she could no longer trust or respect. She was staying in the house temporarily while David looked for somewhere else to live, and she was considering moving to a different state to start fresh somewhere without the constant reminders of their life together. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," Jennifer said as we cleaned up after dinner. "The way he talked about other women, the comments he made about marriages and commitment, the times he came home late without good explanations. I thought I was being a trusting wife, but I was actually being willfully blind." "Jennifer, predators are good at hiding their true nature from the people closest to them," I reminded her. "You weren't responsible for monitoring his behavior or preventing his choices. That's not what marriage is supposed to be." As the evening wound down, I found myself standing in Patricia's backyard, looking at the desert landscape that stretched beyond their property line. The Arizona sunset was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and for the first time in months, I felt truly peaceful. Michael joined me, slipping his arm around my waist and pulling me close. "How are you feeling about being here?" he asked. "Surprisingly good," I answered honestly. "It feels like we're reclaiming this space, taking it back from the trauma and making it about family and love again." "I'm proud of you," Michael said. "For fighting back, for refusing to be silenced, for protecting not just yourself, but probably other women David might have targeted in the future." His words reminded me of something Maria had said during our final meeting. By taking legal action against David, by refusing to accept his lies and manipulation, I had potentially prevented him from victimizing other women. The documentation of his behavior pattern would follow him, making it harder for him to find new employment in positions where he'd have power over women, and the public nature of his admission would serve as a warning to potential future victims. That night, as Michael and I drove home through the familiar Phoenix streets, I reflected on how much had changed since Christmas Eve. I'd lost some relationships that I'd thought were important, but I'd gained something even more valuable, an unshakable confidence in my own worth and my own truth. I'd learned that protecting yourself sometimes means disappointing people who want you to stay small and quiet. I'd discovered that standing up to bullies and predators requires not just courage in the moment, but sustained determination through months of backlash and pressure. I'd realized that justice isn't always swift or satisfying, but it's always worth pursuing. Most importantly, I'd proven to myself that I was stronger than I'd ever known. The woman who had been cornered in that basement storage room had found the strength to fight back, to demand accountability, and to rebuild her life on her own terms. 6 months later, I received a letter from a woman named Amanda, who had seen the news coverage of David's settlement and my legal victory. She wrote to thank me for coming forward, explaining that David had harassed her when she was a young real estate assistant at his firm 3 years earlier. She'd been too scared to report it at the time, but my case had given her the courage to seek counseling and work through her own trauma. Reading about your strength helped me realize that what happened to me wasn't my fault, and that I didn't have to carry that shame anymore, Amanda wrote. Thank you for refusing to be silenced. Your courage gave me permission to heal. Letters. Like Amanda's reminded me why the fight had been worth it, even when it felt overwhelming and isolating. By refusing to accept David's version of events, by demanding accountability for his actions, I'd not only protected myself, I'd helped break a cycle that had been harming women for years. Today, almost 2 years later, I can honestly say that the assault and its aftermath were among the most difficult experiences of my life, but they also led to some of the most important growth I've ever experienced. I learned to trust my instincts, to set firm boundaries, and to refuse to sacrifice my truth for the comfort of others. Michael and I are stronger than ever, with a marriage built on deeper communication and mutual support. Jennifer has started a new life in Colorado, where she's teaching at a school that specializes in helping children who've experienced trauma. Patricia and Robert have become fierce advocates for women's safety, volunteering with organizations that support assault survivors. And David? He moved to another state after the divorce was finalized, hopefully to get the help he clearly needs and to build a life that doesn't involve victimizing women. I don't know what became of him, and I don't want to know. My energy is better spent on moving forward than looking backward. The house in Scottsdale still feels like home, but it's a different kind of home now. One where I'm fully myself, where my voice matters, where my boundaries are respected. The pool in the backyard is still my sanctuary, but now it represents not just peace, but victory. Every evening as I watch the Arizona sunset paint the sky, I'm reminded that sometimes the most beautiful views come after you've weathered the worst storms. I've learned that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about the people who stand by you when the truth is difficult, who support you when you need to make hard choices, who celebrate your strength instead of asking you to diminish it. Real family doesn't ask you to protect abusers or stay silent about assault. Real family believes you, supports you, and helps you heal. Most importantly, I've learned that you don't have to accept unacceptable behavior just because it comes from someone you're supposed to love. You don't have to sacrifice your safety for someone else's comfort. You don't have to be small to make other people feel big. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, for your real family, and for other potential victims, is to refuse to be silent, to demand accountability, and to insist that predators face consequences for their actions. It's not easy, and it's not always popular, but it's always right. And in the end, living in your truth and protecting your dignity is worth more than maintaining relationships built on lies, manipulation, and the expectation that victims should suffer in silence to preserve everyone else's comfort. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.